now we're on to the second portion of today's program, in which I will talk to you a little bit about my process and what interests me as a playwright and why I am a writer, all of the above. So I wanted to first offer a warning to you all. I wrote this on the side of my page, and I think it's worth saying, but I have no idea what I'm talking about. But you've got to believe something to make art, and this is what I believe. So I wanted to take this time to talk to you all about why I write for the theater, how I write for the theater, and the vitality of the form itself. This talk will now organize itself into two discrete sections, tonality and goodness. These concepts do converse in my work, but when I sat down to engage my thinking on their relationship to my process, I found they organize themselves into a set of entirely distinct and oftentimes conflicting properties. This is utterly thrilling to me. Art, particularly the art of bodies and language, is often mistaken for this formal and orderly thing. We all have the residue of Freytag's 5-act structure that we all learned in high school when we were studying Romeo and Juliet, with rising action, climax, falling action, etc. This exquisite shape, Mount Parnassus, the home of the Muses, the birthplace of Pegasus, the winged horse. But this is an entirely fabricated assumption of how theater works. An assumption that I do not doubt was brought into the public consciousness because of its satisfying formality. But theater is contradiction. Or more specifically, it is the demonstration of the familiar contradictions we experience in our waking lives put before us as a mirror. It's tension, it's messy, it's ugly, and it's explosive. I mean, even the act of our imagining that what we see on stage actually matters, when we have full awareness that it's all costumes and makeup and lights, is a type of contradiction. Now, when I say theater, I bet you and I have very different ideas about what that means. And that's okay. There's an audience for all different types of art making. It's not a one or the other type of deal. I think I know every single word to West Side Story. But if you were to come to see one of my plays, or as you just saw, you'd be seeing something just about as far away from West Side Story as you could imagine. It's still theater, they're both theater, but different. And I want to spend this time talking about the theater I make. So I ask that you be open to the difference. I reach towards a theater that is emotionally imperative. I reach towards a theater that doesn't concern itself with logic of story. I reach towards a theater that behaves like music, that gives an audience colors and shapes and gestures, but lets them decide the happening, the going on. Let's listen to a bit of music. Here Comes the Sun by the Beatles. I think we probably all know it, we all love it, but before I press play to listen to it, let's hum it together just for a moment, without words, just so we can sort of remind ourselves how it goes. No. We love that melody, right? It's really strong and satisfying melody. So let's listen for a sec. So this is horizontal thought. It's melody, it's story, it's one thing happening right after the next. It's West Side Story, it's A Doll's House, it's Neil Simon, it's Hamilton. It's great suspenseful, edge of your seat, what's gonna happen next? And there's a definite skill to making theater like this. But this is not the art that I'm interested in making. Now let's listen to the piece Lyric for Strings by George Walker, the first African-American composer to win the Pulitzer Prize. I'm going to skip a little bit too to get a good moment. harder to sing along to. And I don't think that's just because we haven't heard it as many times as we've heard the Beatles. It's organized differently. I would say that it's organized vertically. It's harmony, it's metaphor, it's the blossoming feeling inside of us that comes when we hear one beautiful thing after another. This is my theater. This is the vertical theater, the theater of harmony. Now that we've sort of distinguished two types of theater, it might be good to think about what must be in place for something to be theater, regardless if it's working horizontally or vertically. This will help us as we move forward in the talk. Okay, so at its core, theater needs to mean something. It requires that, one, an audience care about what's happening. In more elegant terms, we must have hope. Two, an audience learns something before the end of the night. This is particularly powerful when the moment of learning comes as a surprise. Our minds are plastic when we are surprised. We are that much more ready to take in the new information and incorporate it into our lives. And then three, this is connected to the second one, but an audience sees something that they have never seen before, but in a way, or that they have seen before, but in a way they haven't seen it. Let me say that one more time. Theater requires that an audience see something they have seen before, but in a way they haven't seen it. This is particularly tricky. More to come on this idea. So there you have it, the three tenets of theater. I wonder if we can talk about the short solo performance you saw at the beginning. Using my own work to test my own theories is risky, I know, but let's try it. Let's see, does John Berryman Reads My Poems fit into these three principles? Now, bear with me, be generous. This piece is still growing, it's still changing, so work with me, please. Although, what do you guys think? This is how I broke it down. And first I should say that all these three things sort of bleed into one another. They all sort of are talking about the same thing. But I think I can check off the first box. The audience cares about what's happening. They have hope for the mystery of the play to unravel. And that care circulates around a want to understand. It's like following a trail of breadcrumbs. The audience may not be sure where the trail is leading, but they follow it because they're hungry and they want the next breadcrumb. This is certainly a type of hope. A hope to be full by the time the breadcrumbs run out. Did the audience learn anything? Yes, I think they did. I mean, outside of the sort of philosophical and thematic spine of the play, the audience learned that the event of this poet sitting here with one of his students turned out not to be what they thought it was. They were primed for this understanding. And then theater requires that an audience see something they have seen before, but in a way they haven't seen it. How was the audience primed for this new understanding? Let me frame it in a more specific question. Was the light ever not a street light? Yes and no. We initially thought, hopefully, it was a light in John Berryman's academic office. But it was always too bright, it was always out of reach of the poet, and it was always a thing that decided for itself whether it was on or off. So even when we were seeing a lamp on a desk, we were seeing a street light. This is the behavior of metaphor in theater. Because theater is a time-bound art, metaphor can happen on a structural scale, and we can actually see the process of transformation between things. Plays are like Bernini's statue, oh, this terrible picture, Daphne and Apollo. Look at the nymph. She is both tree and human at the same time. And for every moment of tree we see, we go back and re-understand how it relates to her body. Branches are her hair. Roots are her feet. When the transformation happens in the theater, the audience does the same thing. We go back and retrace the movement of the metaphor. I would encourage you all to go home tonight and read or watch some great plays to test this idea. Watch how light and lampshades transform in A Streetcar Named Desire, or how drugs and alcohol organize our perceptions in A Long Day's Journey into Night. Oedipus, of course, uses sight and blindness. King Lear uses the concept of nothing. When Lear enters in the final moments of the play with his daughter weightless in his arms, how is it any different than him calling her nothing at the very beginning? Why is this re-seeing important? Because it points to our human vulnerability. It makes it crucial, and it makes it shared. We as an audience are proven wrong, are proven ignorant, and are proven limited. It's not a shameful feeling. It's an opening towards growth. It's hearing the end of a riddle, a solution we could have never seen coming, but of course was there all along. All the great plays I've mentioned above have this cavernous depth to them, where the river of our inner world flows. In the final moments of these plays, the river rises up and spills onto the surface of the earth, and we recognize our own humanity. We see ourselves for a flash moment, truly see ourselves. And what can be more magical than that? All right, so now that we have sort of a shared understanding of what theater is, let's talk about some of my thoughts about my work. So we'll start with tonality. I want to think about the beginning, the inception, the genesis, the neural impulses that drive an artistic endeavor in theater. This is a complicated ambition, regardless of the related profession, but it feels especially difficult to nail down in artistic ideation. An inventor has it easy. Well, maybe not easy, but there's certainly logical immediacy to the start of an inventor's work. We all see how it happens. The inventor notices, he assesses, and then they streamline, all in an instant. Oh, when you open the door, it swings too wide and hits the wall. Now there's a dent in the drywall. I always have to be on my game to catch the door before it hits. I know, I'll put a little rubber stopper at the bottom that keeps the door from hitting the wall. Noticing, assessing, and streamlining. Now the value of the inspired moment is no less significant than that of an artist. But it seems to me the difference lies in the motivation. An inventor's being serviceable, and an artist's being poetic. An artist notices, an artist assesses, but then rather than streamlining, an artist transforms. An artist's role, contrary to the implications of value in a capitalistic society, does not strive to make the life of the public easier, quicker, or more orderly. Quite the opposite. An artist drives the subtlety of the human experience to the surface, which can oftentimes be arduous, painful, and marvelously complex. So we've already opened this can of worms, but everything to me seems to hinge on that final moment of artistic pursuit, transformation. It's a tricky thing to talk about. Why? Well, what I have found in my short life of writing and making theater, rather than transformation being a concrete, logic-based thinking, like the process of streamlining for an inventor, where you can clearly track the upswing of an idea, it is a largely emotional experience. It's subjective and personal. We have a pitcher of water, and we have an empty vase. Not just any vase, but a beautifully designed vase that's maybe modeled to look like an hourglass or a figure 8. And we pour the water from the pitcher into this new vase. And what happens? The water takes the form of the new container. Can we say when the moment of transformation takes place? I think it's tricky to pin down, but it's somewhere hidden in the magic as we pour. In that progression of moments, the water is actually 3 things at once: the form of the pitcher, the water itself, and then the fancy new vase. Oh, gosh. So now, how often are you asked to think about this? Think like this. I mean, I have to exercise my brain to stay engaged with this type of metaphorical thought. Perhaps you can imagine why artists are more often than not temperamental. We devote ourselves to seeing double or triple. We are insatiably hungry for metaphor. Do not mistake me, the life of an artist is no more difficult than any other life. We are simply tuned differently to the world. I'm always chasing after resonant moments that are able to transform, blips within life that feel supercharged with poetic potential. Moments when some things 2 or 3 things at once. This is what I call valuable tonality. Tonality is an absolute concept. Everything has tonality. Tonality is simply the arrangement of objects, physical or aesthetic, brought into pleasing order. I taught at a Quaker school last year and was moved by some of the spiritual language in the curriculum. Language that brought the divine into really immediate terms. Quakers talk about the light of God existing in all people and things. I am borrowing this exquisite idea to illuminate the principles of tonality. If all things have the light inside of them, then tonal arrangements only make the light in each thing grow brighter, like throwing a log on the fire. Another way to think about the role of an artist is someone constantly searching for arrangements of objects that shine at their max. Now, I can't tell you why certain arrangements are more powerful than others. I'm sure there's a wealth of aesthetical and philosophy on this subject, but I don't really find that especially interesting. I honestly don't care to know why something is tonal. To know why almost defeats the purpose. It attempts to convert the ungrounded poetic logic into something almost scientific. Can you imagine if we actually cracked the code and figured out the formula to decipher why the arrangement of colors in a Paul Klee painting, or the notes in a string quartet by Beethoven, or the words in a novel by Toni Morrison released the most inner light? How dull would art become if we understood exactly how it worked? I choose to let the divine linger in it, a great mystery that I know will always be there for me to puzzle over. Let's test some of this theory. This is a method created by the contemporary theater artist Anne Bogart. It's called viewpoints. She breaks her method into 9 discrete concepts: spatial relationship, kinesthetic response, shape, gesture, repetition, architecture, tempo, duration, and topography. That's 9, right? Yep. I mean, she's written entire books about this, and we're only going to scrape the surface. But we'll be dealing with one of her viewpoints, spatial relationships. So we're going to be a little theater company together for a moment. Before we begin, I just want to say that in theater, there are really no wrong answers in what we do. I tell this to actors that I work with all the time. And they say, really? And I say, yes, but they still don't believe me. But truly, there are no wrong answers. We're thinking poetically, so we'll be asking that we listen to our impulses. If it feels right, it probably is. For now, can I have 2 brave volunteers? Excellent, yes.
I'm old, can't hurt.
Okay. I'm going to ask you guys. I'm going to ask you guys to come forward to the front of the space, please. No, there are no wrong answers. Thank you. Yeah, come on up. All right, so this is an exercise from Anne Bogart's viewpoints. So I'm going to ask, can I ask your name?
Luwanda.
Luwanda and Mary. Excellent. So Luwanda, can you place yourself somewhere in this space? And Mary, why don't you step out for now? Excellent. And yes, and excellent. You can arrange yourself whatever way you want. You can be facing the audience, facing away, as you are. Great. So Mary, can you now put yourself in relation to Luwanda? Can you find a dynamic spatial arrangement with her? Excellent. Excellent. Great. Can we go back now? Cool. Let's clear the space. And Mary, now why don't you be the first person to find a spot? Excellent. And Luwanda, can you now put yourself in relationship to her? Wonderful. Can we maybe throw a third person in the mix? Quinn, why don't you head on up? See if you can find another dynamic and interesting way to change this picture. Make it into something new. Interesting. Can we try all 3 of us building a picture with as much space between each other as possible? I'll only torture you for a little longer. Wow. And And now can we try another picture where we're very close together? This would be the last thing I would do. Oh, lovely. Great. Thank you, Luanda, Mary, and Quinn. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So did you see how some of those arrangements were more powerful than others? I'm thinking of the one where they were pointing at each other and Luanda was all the way over in the corner. That felt powerful to me. And some arrangements were holding more meaning than others. For example, that one that I just described seemed to be telling me a story, seemed to be inviting me into its logic. And now this is off the cuff work. These arrangements, they don't really have any context to exist in. So the meaning we can get from it is pretty limited. But imagine an entire play that is built around tonal relationships like this. And then we don't just think about the placement of bodies in space. Think about the levels, as Mary already showed us. So that, some actors might be standing, others might be kneeling. One actor might be running across the stage as another actor crawls. And we haven't even touched the language component yet. But this is the culmination of tonal arrangements. These ideations all spelled out on stage, bleeding into one another, make a piece of theater. Bright and alive moment, passing into another bright and alive moment, passing into another bright and alive moment. Now, really talented artists have the ability to build tonal relationships that predict the next tonal relationship. I think the best way to approach this concept is through music, as there are already established tonal patterns that different composers riff on. Just 1 second. This is why I need a stage crew. So even though you might not know it, or might not realize it, there are certain patterns in music that we understand, that we have a relationship to, like, this can be a little louder. Right? If you think about it, that's just right? Happy birthday to you. We understand what that means, correct? And there are certain chords that ask us, and that lead us and ask us to become a part of new moments, like this chord. It's just begging to turn into this. Do you feel how this feels like home base, right? So to sort through this, we'll listen to the end of a piece by the composer Benjamin Britten, Canticle number 1, My beloved is mine and I am his. Think about how much back and forth I'd have to do there on my exercise. mean, it's absolutely gorgeous music, but incredibly simple. And it really works on one principle. It's an incredibly simple musical organization. We have two chords. For now, let's call them finishing chords and leading chords. Yeah, can everybody remember that, you think? So this finishing chords feels like we're at the end, right? We're home base. Leading wants to go into our finishing chord, yes? So Britten constructs the melody line so that it's always just a bit offset. When it feels like the melody is closing, he throws in a leading chord, which then pushes him into the next phrase of the melody. So let's listen for a moment. I'm going to be singing very, very poorly, so forgive me. But we start with a finishing chord, and then the melody comes in. That I my best beloved am, that he is mine. That's the end of the melody line. Are we at the end of the accompaniment? We're on a leading chord, right? It wants to go into that I my best beloved am. Are we done? No, we can't be, right? We can't end here. That he is mine. We're back in again, right? Mine. Can't end yet. That he is mine. We're still offset. We're not lined up yet. Here we go. That he is mine. And he ends on a very special note. This note, D, exists in both the finishing chord and the leading chord. So even then, even when he gets to the end of his melody, he still ends it so that he's able to put this little tag at the end as well. There's that leading chord again. And finally, we've arrived at home base. We're there. We're done. So you see how he offsets it. It never quite lines up until the last moment when it does. And that's really, really smart artistic development. And that's what we seek to do when we write plays. It can't end until it does. And every moment that we move into has to be required by the moment that came before it. This is a really compact way to think about valuable tonality. One thing leads to the next, not because we force it to, but because it must. All artists think this way. It's thrilling to me because it feels like radical work. In order to get here, you have to do really, really deep listening. Endings to plays are usually the things that come last to me. Endings are the hardest to devise because they must be a delicious tonal arrangement that puts itself in relationship to everything that came before it. It's got to be the last bite of pie that reminds you how stinking good all the other bites of pie were. I've spent hours in the shower, in the car, eating a meal, running, just on my bed, staring up at the ceiling, puzzling my way through an ending. Someday, I will learn that this is the least effective way to find the final moments of a play. The best way, the only way to get there is to put your ear to the play that you already have. You have to listen hard and put all your energy there, and it will tell you what it wants. This might sound silly, but it's absolutely true. You must treat a play for what it is, an organic, living being. I mean, we've already shown this to be true if theater is just the stacking up and across of valuable tonal moments. Arrangements that make the light of God, to use that Quaker phrase, shine through. I've seen it happen. Letting the ending come from you rather than the piece is what has doomed many pieces of art. They do not practice listening with as much dedicated care as they should. And so, their work wraps up in a way that is limp and loose. And in times that prioritize subjective experiences, I can't think of a more beautiful thing than listening. It is an endlessly growthful practice. It will always be timely. It will always be generous. Even when faced with, "You'll never understand," listening reaches and opens and holds and cherishes. Nothing evil can come from listening. It's an essential aspect of theater and something that I will never be good at. The important thing is that we keep trying. This leads me to the final section of my talk about goodness. I was raised Roman Catholic, so ritual is a huge part of my experience. I've always been accustomed to sitting in communion with people, listening to someone tell me a story. I mean, this is essentially what the Catholic Mass is. And it didn't take me long to realize that theater functions the same way. Now, growing up, I was mainly interested in musical theater. I started with the greats, Les Mis, West Side Story, The Phantom of the Opera, etc. Then I became obsessed with Stephen Sondheim. Company, Sweeney Todd, Into the Woods, Sunday in the Park with George, great musicals. Smart, interesting stories. But then, when I was probably a senior in high school, musicals stopped being crucial to me. I stopped sensing communion when I would see them or listen to them. It wasn't a vital act that I'd be sitting with people to experience them. It wasn't until I started studying the Greek tragic canon that I realized why I had lost interest in the American musical theater. Greek tragedy is an explicitly moralistic form. The theater was organized around a religious festival, the Dionysian Festival. It's been sort of culturally warped to be understood as this just huge drunken feast. But I'm not sure this conception is totally accurate. At the center of the festival was a grand performance, tightly organized with components of poetry, song, and ritualized dance. The audience approached the tragic plays as a means to exercise choice without consequence. The thought being, if the public sees the demonstrations, lived in imagined mythology for a few hours, they would take the moral conclusions arrived at by the end of the play and incorporate it into their own personal lives. So the Dionysian Festival was most likely very similar to how we experience the Catholic Mass. People went to the theater to be changed and to be opened. And we still go to the theater to be changed and to be opened. What I find so engrossing about Greek tragic form is that it doesn't try to simplify issues of morality. I know this is a bold statement, but I think that the American theater is in crisis. It's popularized a form or a style of theater that lets its audience forget its social responsibilities. It's not moralistically instructional. The American musical theater feels like it makes goodness into this expansive, emotionally motivated thing. And thinking through this talk, I went back and looked at some of my favorite American musicals, and pretty much across the board, they purport goodness as a one-note concept. True love wins every time. You'll always get what's coming to you. If you're good to other people, they will remember you. Hard work pays off. Everything boils down to these very simple axioms. We have become lazy in our thinking around goodness. The Greek tragic canon never gave its audience its lesson in an already digested, put it on a motivational poster phrase. The Greek theater extends its moral logic outside the boundaries of the play. These ancient pieces of theater still ask you to consider their meaning after you've left the theater. Today, a well-realized production of Sophocles makes you feel, yes, no one wants Oedipus to stab his eyes out, but it also makes you consider your own state of being. There is this rigor built into the DNA of the theater that asks its audience what it means to be alive. The only other place I've been asked to think about my state of being as deeply was at Mass. This religious institution that required that I complicate goodness, that I not make it into an understood thing, but instead use it as the basis for weekly mental exercises and meditation. In other words, I lived with lessons as best as I knew how. This is what I strive for in the content of my theater. I would like to show you a short excerpt from a play I am working on currently with 2 collaborators. We've made this piece in a devised fashion, meaning I did not approach the work with a script in hand, but instead we generated the material collectively through a mixture of improvisation, games, direction, found, and original text. The play concerns itself with the question, what does it mean to hate someone you once loved? The sort of larger thematic gesture of the work centers on the idea of atonement and the process of erasing people from your life. This moment comes towards the end of the play, where the moral impulse is sort of collecting. Let me get to a good place here.
You bought all those new clothes.
Yeah.
And do you remember that time we went to the diner at 2 a.m. and I had way too many pancakes?
No.
And do you remember that time that we went to the bar and afterwards we came home and started making out with that boy on our couch and I came out of my room and saw you guys?
Yes.
And do you remember that time at the intersection?
Yeah. You always say you were coming down Main, but you were coming down Jefferson. And you were trying to take a right turn, but I had the green arrow to go left, so I went first.
This gesture that we found has a lot of meaning, I think. One character is blind, and throughout the play, she has largely made her other partner invisible. She feels wronged by him and has chosen to make him disappear. And yet he still aids her in the basic task of putting away clothes. But even this action has greater depth to it because as the bodies work, he also lifts their shared memories to the surface of the experience. He is putting himself fully in service of this person who will not and cannot see him. This is a complicated moral gesture that has been at the root of our work together. This is not an easy expression of goodness. In the context of the play, I don't think that it's meant to make an audience feel particularly warm. It sacrifices its accessibility to give the audience a chance to actually participate in the meaning of the play. We've designed this gesture to not give you all the answers, but make you think deeply about the behavior of goodness, about what it means to be alive. I want my theater to feel like church. I want my theater to drive an audience to think. I want my theater to ask an audience to no longer be complacent in their moral perceptions, but instead engage and reflect. I want there to be nothing easy about my theater. Thank you all so much for listening to my thoughts. You are all more than welcome to watch a rehearsal of this performance this evening starting at 6:30. Please come, because it's always meaningful when other people are engaged with the process. And we'll be showing this play in February, so keep an eye on the Center at Eagle Hills page for more information. But thank you so much.